Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Alex Pollier. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm very excited to have such a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. I have been part of this journey for quite a while now, and am very, very proud of the publication that we're all here to discuss tonight. The Last Notebook by Lewis Kahn. Sue, I'm joined by Michael J. Lewis, the architectural historian and critic, and Sue Ann Kahn, Lewis Kahn's daughter, and Lars Mu, the publisher, the one and only. And this has been an extraordinary labor of love, I think, for everyone on this stage to see this finally published. And we're very excited to kind of take you through it tonight, discuss what's inside it, what's not in it, and how it all came to be. And so I would like to, I guess, kick the event off by asking Michael, pick up the clicker, who, this project, obviously everybody knows a lot about Lewis Kahn. I would expect everyone in this room. But this notebook, which is a compilation, his sketchbook from the last year of his life, is really a very intimate portrait into his process, his thoughts, his ideas, and what he was working on. This yesterday was also the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of his death. And what I think this book really shows us is how even in 1974, he was really at the peak of his career. Things were, he was catapulting off and had so much going on. If only, he had more time, I'm sure, Sue Ann can tell us a little bit more about what he was still working on. But the notebook really just shows a man in his prime, and I love that. So I wanted to ask Michael maybe just briefly to kind of take us through a little bit about Kahn the man, some of his iconic projects that put him on the map. Please.
Sure. Alex, thank you. And welcome, everybody. Nice to see a lot of friends out there. You're in this room because you know who Lewis Kahn is, and you know his importance, but it always helps to review. This is my favorite picture of Lewis Kahn, and it reminds me of one of the great paintings in the history of art, Raphael's School of Athens, where Plato and Aristotle are next to one another, Plato pointing upwards to the heavens, Aristotle pointing down to the earth. And here, Kahn has compressed all of antique learning into a single photo. And in a way, this is the theme of his career, to match the heavens with the reality of the earth. And it was quite a struggle. He was born struggling. He was born in a very poor family in the Russian Empire, what is now Estonia. For the moment, Estonia, we'll see what happens. Emigrated as a child to Philadelphia, where he spent his entire working life, the rest of his life from 1904 on. And I think you can make a claim, I want to make the claim, he is the most important American architect of the second half of the 20th century. His influence was the same as Frank Lloyd Wright in the first half of the 20th century. And there hasn't been his like since then, someone with that extraordinary influence. And he did it from a provincial city in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. That's the amazing thing. He's a product of Philadelphia. And his education was Philadelphian. He was at the University of Pennsylvania from 1920 to 24, where he trained under the great Beaux-Arts import, Paul Kray. He learned to design like Paul Kray. He learned to draw like Paul Kray. Here is his first major building. This is for the sesquicentennial exhibition of 1926, the world's least distinguished World's Fair of all time, for the 150th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And this is characteristic of what Philadelphia was producing in the 1920s, a Beaux-Arts classicism meeting the demands of the modern world, stripped down, severe, kind of austerity appropriate to a steel frame building. And Kahn from the beginning was a very talented artist. For a time he thought he might be a painter, But he was in great demand as an architectural draftsman. From 1924 to 1928, in 4 years, he earned enough money to take a grand tour, went to Europe. Your mother told me once, Sue Ann, they were already engaged, but during the year he never sent her so much as a postcard, which well, that's a different discussion. He came back in 1929, the worst year to begin a mature career, because the conditions had changed. The kind of buildings that he was asked to do would no longer be this. They would be small, modest housing projects, from which he earned his bread and butter throughout the 30s. He learned to design differently, and he learned to draw differently. He had to forget everything that Cray taught him, and now he tried to learn desperately to draw like Le Corbusier. And then began really 2 decades in the wilderness, the architectural wilderness, from which he emerges in the early 1950s, first at Yale with the Yale Art Gallery, which you know. And then at the end of that decade, he begins to make buildings that would shock the world, beginning with this one, the Richards Medical Building, which is a very functional building, but tells you buildings can be functional, but they don't need to be sterile, cold, and dull. They can celebrate joyously their function. Here, his famous separation of served and servant spaces. And this began a cascade of masterpieces. I believe this the finest art gallery in America, and I'm looking at architects who've designed fine art galleries in America. This is the Kimball, where he was told by the director he had to design an art gallery that was not a vacuum-packed sardine can that should admit in a sliver of foliage, sky, water, and light. And the sliver of light that goes in the Kimball is the most extraordinary way of bringing in bright Texan sunlight into a gallery that could be imagined. And then his dormitory at Bryn Mawr, Erdman, which has all the tragic dignity of a Roman bath made into a space of human gathering. I always look at it, my heart skips a beat, because I lived there briefly when I was a Haverford student in the 1970s. I cannot look at that space without hearing Earth, Wind, and Fire pounding out and a nimbus cloud of marijuana rising above the space. But the greatest building at this point of his career is the Salk Institute in La Jolla, California, where Kahn took the most reactionary tool of the Beaux-Arts, the axis, the straight march that led you to the throne of a king or to the altar of God, and he took the axis back to what it did at Stonehenge, which was relate the earth to the heavens there, a kind of cosmological synchronization. So this is what Kahn did in that 25-year magnificent run. His batting average was pretty much 1,000. And what he did was rejuvenate and restore, I would argue, a modernism that had grown formulaic, predictable, and academic, and breathed new life into it by making buildings that didn't quite seem modern. They didn't quite seem ancient. They seemed timeless. And it seemed as if they had always been there. But of course, they hadn't always been there. They were the product of a mind and a hand, which is why we are here to talk about that.
Yes, and for those of you who haven't seen the publication yet, it's actually divided into 2 different books. So there's the actual facsimile of the notebook, which is really, Kahn in his own words. And then there's the commentary, which has Michael's opinions, which are very valid. And so, this has been a labor of love for Sue Ann for a long time. It's interesting because these 2 had not sat down and even discussed the project until a year ago. Most books, as we know, take more than a year to publish. So I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about the process of how the book came into being. And specifically, Sue Ann, why this notebook? Kahn had many sketchbooks. They were his signature. They were his pride and joy. But clearly something in this one spoke to you. So tell us a little bit about how you guys brought this project into fruition and why I'm holding this one in my hand.
Well, there are about 18 notebooks of various sizes and shapes. Many of them look like this. And I've seen most of them. But I always felt that this had a special quality to it. And for probably the last 15 years, I've wanted to have a facsimile of it so that everybody could enjoy it. I felt that it had a very personal, poetic feeling to it. A lot of my father's personality in it. Every time I opened it, it made me smile. I wasn't sure why. I knew it had wonderful drawings of Roosevelt Island Memorial in it, and we're going to get to some of those in a minute. But there was a lot more to it. And I never felt that way about all the other notebooks, which were really very interesting, but it didn't have the same feeling. And I tried various publishers, and sort of something was going, and then it fell apart and so on. And then actually Michael reminded me that 2024 was going to be the 50th anniversary of my father's death, which absolutely gobsmacked me. I had no idea that it had been 50 years. And I thought, oh, wow, you know. And I saw that Lars was going to be in New York, and I thought maybe I'll try again to see if he might be interested in publishing this, and one thing led to another. And we decided to go for it with a very short time span of having it come out as a commemorative book, in a way to honor my father's memory is what I thought. Although I always had the idea that I wanted to share this, and everybody should have one. And I never meant it also to be a very precious thing, but something that people could get inspired with, carry around in their pocket, maybe leave their computer at home or their iPhone at home and draw in it. There's a lot of empty pages in here. We're going to discuss this later. And the hope is that if you acquire this book, you're going to turn to the empty pages, maybe turn it back this way and start again, and write your own, make your own drawings and your own thoughts in it. So I always felt that it's a book that should be shared.
Let's look at a couple of these sketches. Well, one of the first things, this is the first page. Kahn had just gotten the commission in early 1973 to design the Roosevelt Memorial on what would become Roosevelt Island. How many of you have been there? Whoa. Bravo.
Good room.
Wasn't expecting that. So he bought it a block from his office on Walnut Street, Philadelphia, the art supply store where we bought all of these very handsome English-made sketchbooks. This is the first page. This was on his mind. This is the first impulse for the Roosevelt Memorial. He called it the Bastion. It would have been a 60-foot high steel cylinder within a cube. But a few pages later, he's at Yale, which is already at the stage of contract drawings, but what bothers him is the plaza entrance from his earlier art gallery. So you find him making very well-developed presentation drawings. This is a man 72 years old, an age where many architects are wrapping up their careers or delegating assignments like this to younger job captains. And then a few pages later, making frantic lecture notes as he takes a train up to New York. So the point of the sketchbook is it's not only a work in progress as he thinks himself through design projects he's working on, it's a kind of diary of this last year of his life. And towards the end of it, we see him returning to the Roosevelt Memorial, which is now, it's now looming into completion, and he's now not designing, he's thinking about how to present it. And these are some of the most glorious atmospheric ones. And here, Lars excelled in capturing, there's a very elusive graphite drawings, very hard to get them into facsimile form. But I think for Sue Ann, the most exciting page is when your dad took it, when he's being honored as a fellow of the American Academy, and passes it around for people to write their names and addresses in.
Well, we didn't know what this page was just yet, but the fact that he signed and dated it, he never signed and dated any of his other notebooks. And so I thought, well, what went on that day? And then I looked at the names here. These are names of people very important in the art world of New York in 1973. And I thought, looks like he's at a party, and he's collecting info from these people. And what went on that date? And I looked at his calendar, and the calendar said Brunner Award. Didn't say anything else. And I know Bob Venturi was getting a Brunner Award that year at the Academy. I thought, well, maybe he went up to New York. He obviously nominated Bob for that award. He was going to present the award or make a speech. And I later found out that, in fact, he himself received the gold medal for architecture that day. That was not in his calendar. However, that's why he went to New York. And he was in New York. And what you're seeing, these names, and then the speech that he wrote in this notebook, and we found that he wrote it according to the director. When she asked, could we have a copy of your speech, and he said, I'm sorry, but I wrote it in this little notebook, on the way, in the train up to New York. I wrote the speech in here. So they photographed it, and that's how we know it was, in fact, on that date that he wrote the speech in the notebook. And we have a picture of him with the notebook at a party, talking and gesturing, and the notebook is in his hand, the very one.
Well, the notebook isn't the only noteworthy thing in that photo, Sue.
Well,
Your mom?
my mom is there on the right, but she clearly noticed the photographer. My father was oblivious to the photographer at this point.
Well, there's a personal, your mom is wearing.
Oh, she was wearing this necklace, but you weren't going to mention this. I didn't realize that I was wearing, but it occurred to me, wearing the same necklace. But he was a very, very social person. He loved talking to people. When he wasn't drawing, he was talking, and very often he was doing both at the same time, as those of you who knew him, and there are people here who did know him, he was always either drawing or talking or both. And he was so interested in connecting with people, no matter where he was, what country he was, what language they spoke. He was just that very social being. So that page kind of got me into this book and started.
Well, and I want to ask Lars a little bit about the actual construction of such a book, because Lars is very selective in what he publishes. He has published books on Kahn before, on his drawings, and so obviously, would be very interested in this personal, intimate sketchbook. But you'll see the effort it took to replicate this, because the pages are so sheer, so thin. But so just wondering, especially with the timeline that you were given, what were the challenges, particularly in bringing this to fruition?
Yeah. I must say that, actually, I mentioned it yesterday, we met on the 20th of March last year. So, let's say in a week from now, a year ago. After you actually approached me some years before, through Michael Merrill, who is the author of the other books I've published on Louis Kahn. I think that there are 2 samples in front. Always on the drawings. And so you approached me again, and we met. And as before, I thought, no, it's impossible. It's just impossible to reproduce those sketches or drawings, which are on so extremely thin paper, right? And Louis Kahn drew and wrote on both sides of the paper. So how to reproduce that and print it again recto verso? So kind of impossible, mission impossible, we say. Now, the thing is that since it was kind of a sudden sympathy, no?
Yeah.
So, and I think I took advantage of being an independent publisher who can take sudden decision, right? So after a couple of hours, I think we decided, yes, let's make the impossible possible. And I think we started a process which was very patient, very careful, because I had to find complices, let's say, on the technical side, right? People who also would believe that the impossible would be possible. And that was a lithographer, we call them, you know, who, with all his cameras, he actually exercised with an old analog camera first to just understand, you know, how much light would it deserve to kind of absorb the backside image and to still make the front possible. And then we went into a digital process with the use of magic software, I don't know. And finally, yes, we achieved a result which was pretty close to the original. And still, there was a challenge to find a paper which would allow machine printing, because the paper in the original notebook is, I think, 25 gram in weight, and the minimum you need for printing is 45 gram. And still, we had to find a paper which is transparent to meet actually that very delicate quality of having that shine through and this very, very authentic kind of feel of you know, Lewis Kahn writing and drawing on both sides. So, and we sent tests back and forth, and somehow I wanted to surprise and also satisfy Sue Ann, which has, let's say, less knowledge about reproduction process, so to say. And for me, I always have a certain struggle, because I think the original, the notebook itself, has never been meant to be published or reprinted. You know, it's probably the most intimate and most I have to say, the most unconscious or kind of moment of creating architecture, right? So would you present that or multiply that 3,500 times? So, and the help was actually that, yes, 50 years after, maybe Lewis Kahn would agree, right? Maybe this is the moment. And where Sue Ann and I met actually is that the facsimile has two functions. It looks backwards, which is commemorating Lewis Kahn 50 years after he passed away, while my attitude is kind of looking forward, saying, take this as an example, you know, how iconic architecture began with few strokes on paper. So that is my message. And we kind of meet up with this kind of looking back and looking forward. And it's really my pleasure, and I loved the process, because smaller than two, no team can be, right? So, and it was a pleasure, no? And I would like to add Hester to the team. We were actually three. Hester is my memory, and she has the eye for the micro details, and which I haven't lost. I think I never had it. So finally we achieved. And it's also important to say, yes, we agreed early on that the facsimile remains untouched. Now, Sue Ann invites you to, you know, to draw in it from the back. I would say you don't have to, because you may suddenly meet up with a drawing by Louis Kahn, and that may be difficult. But we also agreed early on that, yes, we need a commentary. All my facsimiles have extended commentaries to make you understand, and we agreed on that, and that should be separated. And that's why you have these two volumes, the kind of quite original facsimile and the contemporary response.
And I think the project that looms largest in the notebook, which is very well discussed in the commentary, obviously is Four Freedoms Park at Roosevelt Island. The idea that it really started in this sketchbook as an idea and that he draws it to completion in the pages. You can really see the entire project all the way through the mind of Louis Kahn. So, Michael, do you want to kind of maybe just walk us through some of the visuals and take us through the project? I think since we've all been there, let's look back.
Well, what's fascinating to me is we see the beginning and the end of this year-long project. From the very beginning, it was clear he wanted to make a memorial that had two components, a landscape component and an architectural one, so a garden and a room. And he's designing this together with Harriet Pattison, who's, some of you have her book, her extraordinary memoir of her time with Kahn. She was his landscape architect during these years. And he was so busy, you get the sense that he's delegating some of the responsibility to her in these early phases, because his first drawings, these are thumbnail sketches, very, very small, where he's dealing with the room, which is still at the bastion phase, the cylinder, and a statue of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it's not clear if Roosevelt is standing, sitting, or in his wheelchair. They're very, very tiny. But if you look at them, he's already thinking about viewing angles. Are you coming to the statue from above, looking down? Are you coming at ground level? Are you looking up? And he's working at the visceral experience as you come to it. And it's not clear at this stage if the memorial itself, the room, is going to be approached as an ascent or you descend to it. What was, as you know, finally you approach a monumental flight of stairs and then you gently descend to it through the garden, come to the room in its final fashion. Here's the extraordinary thing. He budget cutbacks repeatedly during 1973. It's the bane of every architect's existence. Shrank it till it reached its irreducible minimum, where the room is simply this roofless hypaethral temple. There you see at the bottom. He makes the model and he photographs it against a photograph of the New York skyline. This is remarkable. He's got the model, he's creating a little panorama of it, and then he draws that photograph. So it's very strange to make a model, photograph the model, and make a drawing of the model. And there is what you see it now. And clearly these final ones, made towards the end in early 1974, clearly what he is trying to do, and we think this was a frantic creative bout of maybe no more than an hour or two, these 6 or 7 sketches, some more developed than others. He is thinking how to present the model, because he really doesn't need to make drawings having a model to show, but it seems he recognizes that the model itself is kind of lifeless. But the flickering, elusive, calligraphic quality of his drawings, it's very important to him that you have a sense of what the memorial was going to feel like when you are there, under the sky, in the open air. Alas, there's the great stairs going up, descending. Alas, he died before the sculpture was completed by Joe Davidson, and Davidson never had the chance to study it at large scale. But to all of us here, I think this is the most poignant image we have of it, this little girl looking at Roosevelt's proclamation of what those 4 freedoms are. Freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And what's wonderful about them, and this is Kahn's call to the world. What's wonderful about them is those freedoms are facing the United Nations, reminding all the countries in that building to remember these freedoms, which are always negotiable, alas. So the final drawings here, Sue, this is your dad on the world stage.
Well, yeah, and I think, Sue, you wanted to remind us, I guess, of kind of all of the global, like where was your dad in 1973 and 74? It sounds like he was traveling all over the world.
So he traveled all over the world, often with this book, sometimes not. But at the time of his death, he was adding to the Indian Institute of Management, which was being completed, but he was still designing a management center. That was one of the last drawings he made in life, made it on his last day. Bangladesh, the capital of Bangladesh, and this whole city around it was under construction, and that was finished years after his death. He had a project in Nepal that was finished by someone else. Later, he had a project in Rabat, Morocco. He had two projects in Jerusalem, the Government Hill Project and the Horva Synagogue. The Government Hill Project was under development. The Horva Synagogue was very well developed, but waiting to have permission to be built. And then he was asked to really design a whole urban center, a whole city north of Tehran in the Arbuz Mountains. And he was asked by the Empress Farah, was the Shah's wife, to do this together with Kenzo Tange. Both of them had been earlier in a convention about architecture that Farah had set up 2 years before. And she'd gotten to know them. And I think it was the fact that he was doing this two projects in Arab countries, Bangladesh and Rabat, Morocco, and that was very good to have Muslim countries represented. And he was asked to come and take on this project in Tehran, in Iran. And the first time he went to Iran was in November that year, and then he came back in February. But the fact is that my father was really a very global person. And you showed pictures of all the drawings in the buildings in the U.S., but actually he was going all over the world at a time when architects really didn't do that. They do it today, but in 1973, not so much. And he also traveled to California, he traveled to Georgia, he traveled, all around the United States as well. So he was on the move, and as was this book, often with him. But the very last project he took on was this huge project in Tehran. And there's an earlier drawing in the book where he came in November and drew some mountains and some buildings. But this was a plan, an urban center, that he went in February to meet with Kenzo Tange, and they were trying to put their two ideas together. And this is the other kind of favorite page of mine in the book, beside the party, which is that in the original book, maybe you could hold this for me, there was a missing page. And right before this last incomplete drawing, and we didn't know what it was. And Michael and I were at the archive looking at drawings and consulting with Bill Whitaker, the esteemed curator and manager of the archives. And we didn't know much about the Iran project, as I think most people didn't know much about. I knew nothing about this until I realized that was what was in the book as I did my research. So we said, we really like to see the drawings that the archives have of this project. And out comes this huge portfolio of big yellow trace drawings, very colorful. Remember how colorful they were? Lots of pastel. And then in there was this little white page, and we're looking at it, and Bill said, "That's a notebook page." And I said, "Wait a minute." And I got the original notebook. The perforations lined up exactly right. And we realized it was a page from the book. And we later knew that he had drawn this page. It looks kind of like a person's head. The site looks like a person's head. He was drawing this page, well, it was the last day he was in Iran, February 17th, and he was drawing it in the presence of Nader Adalan, who is a Iranian architect whom I talked to. It's very helpful. And in the process of Kenzo Tange. And Kenzo Tange said, oh, you've drawn yourself, you've drawn this head. And then later he brought the book back home and tore the page out of the book, had it photographed, and sent the photograph of this idea where he is combining his ideas with Kenzo Tange's ideas. And he sent it to Kenzo Tange, he sent it to Nader Adalan and a few other people, not annotated like this. And later on, when Gemini Mehta and Romaldo Giurgola were working on a book about his architecture, and he was still alive at that point, working with them, he took the photograph and annotated it so we all know what this drawing is about. So you'll find the annotated version in the commentary book, but the missing page has been put back thanks to Lars's artistry and the world of, I guess, lithography. We've put it back in the notebook, and that's a really cool thing that happened around this.
And Michael, I mean, you wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of notebooks in architecture. Everyone seems to have their kind of favorite way of communicating ideas, but it's almost like a lost art now in the profession. I wonder if you or Lars have anything to kind of say about that.
Well, that may be something for the Q&A, because I know there's architects out there who sketch. People sketch in different ways, and the thing that strikes me about Kahn's use of notebooks, he's not sentimental about them. He did not try to make beautiful sketchbooks. All of them were grabbed, I think, as he's walking out the door, because the same project will ricochet through different notebooks. Some architects are fastidiously separate notebooks for different ones, and so he sees it as a work in progress, and there are other missing pages, we think, that he's often, things you want to see, either were rejected or were so good, would be passed on to a draftsman. And this is the quality that I find it interesting to document his projects, but I said at the beginning, a kind of diary of what his life is like. And he's on the move. If you think about it, Kahn was very good in yellow trace. That was his method, yellow trace. That very flexible, you can smudge it. I think that was his natural language. But you can't carry yellow trace in a taxi so easily. But you can take a notebook on a plane, and I think it began in 1947 when your dad started started teaching design at Yale. He's going up every week from Philadelphia to New Haven, so the sketchbook is a way that he can prepare for his class on the way. And that's how he gets the habit of whatever he's working on at the moment will be in the sketchbook on the train. Now, that's the quality I sense. Is that your memory of how he used them?
I don't have a memory of how he used the sketchbook so much, but I can tell you that my father was never not drawing. He was always drawing, and since he was a child. So it's just natural for him to put his thoughts down for himself. I mean, there are notes for speeches in here, but these speeches, it's not that like he's reading a speech. He's putting his thoughts down to organize them in his own head, like we do. And pencil was, and a charcoal pencil or a regular pencil, that was his way of expressing himself, whether it was with words or doing anything architectural.
You know, the texts for his speeches are interesting because they're not really full text. They're more we'd call them bullet points. You told me once some time ago that your dad was not a comfortable public speaker when you were young, and you saw him get more confident in his public presentations. Now, I look at these and I get the sense these are talks he's given before. He's reminding himself these are, a sentence there is something he can spin for 5 minutes. Is that?
Yeah, in fact, it was my son's idea to do this, actually. we know we know most of the speeches in here exactly what speech it was, and we have a transcription of one of them. And the idea was to show what he actually said. I mean, he could have this little book open, but he could be speaking an hour on a couple of notes. So we have actually a couple of notes, and then the portion of the speech where the words he actually said, which is really kind of neat. And at the end of that speech, he said, well, I thought I had a good idea here, but I really could have closed this book and done better. So now I'm going to show you slides of my buildings. And then he went on to talk for another 2 hours about the buildings. And he loved to share his ideas.
May I repeat myself, maybe? There's a certain intimacy in a sketchbook or notebook like this. I think it was never meant for beauty, you know? And I think it's good. We may project many things. Everybody may project his or her thoughts into that piece. I just believe that Lars Kahn took the secrets with him, right? And I would just say that, as I said before, it should be an exceptional decision to reprint, to create a facsimile of something that has never been meant. Would you want your diary to be published? There are actually very few diaries or notebooks which really deserve to be published and spread, and they lose kind of value while gaining a new value by being shared, which was not their intention, right? So there's a contradiction there. For me as a publisher, it's like, you know, the original and because, you know, when you print a book, you want to spread as many as you can. Well, this is against the character, against the soul of a notebook, right? But I sacrifice actually that principle or that belief. We published also this year a notebook by Le Corbusier, which is the album Punjab, which is very different, but kind of similar in this kind of the architect reflecting on something for him or herself, right? And it's not about the yellow, you know, the tracing paper drawings, which are actually different in scale and kind of meant to communicate an idea to others, share ideas to others, and being a working tool, right? While these super fragile lines, see, I think he draws for himself, right? And Corbusier, he traveled, he got the commission for Chandigarh, and he traveled for 2 weeks through Punjab with his cousin, Pierre Jeanneret, and it was first time in India, and he took notes, and he wrote, and he drew, and what I think was a very important decision we took together, or it was not even a decision, it was obvious that all the notes, the written notes in the book, had to be transcribed, transliterated to be legible for you, right? Because you would give up after 2 lines if you try to decipher some. No. Now you can read what he thought and noted, and as you say, he repeated himself, right? He reminded himself about the importance. Again, not to share it with us, right? But to remind himself. And I insist on that when you have your own copy and you kind of befriend with the intimacy of the notebook, that you just remember it's a very exceptional chance to look into this very private thought of an architect. The same is with Le Corbusier. He drew that to finally, I think he took the commission after that travel. So he was kind of convinced, yes, I'm able to design a capital for these people. And I think that is something where you use a notebook for, right? And that's what I like about. Well, we don't do facsimile for kind of nostalgic reason or so. It's more for encouragement to be authentic as architects, and keep your secrets.
Well, I think we will end on that note, and we will take some questions from the audience. Hope you guys have some. But I just wanted to point out that this is the actual last thing that Kahn drew in the notebook, and it's so kind of pretty and hopeful and very Little Prince-esque. And Michael, I think, wrote this amazing quote, which said, "I find it inexpressibly poignant that its last image shows a lone sparkling star with a line leading to it, as if summoned forth by the wand of a magician who has already disappeared." And I think that's kind of true of Kahn. He disappeared before his time.
50 years ago.
50 years ago, and yet here we are honoring him tonight. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for the panelists for their insights. And you can all buy a copy, your copy, right over here after questions. But we'd love to open it up and see if anyone has any questions for anyone. Anyone? I think there's a microphone that is meant to go around. Great.
Okay, good evening. My question is primarily for Sue Ann, but for anybody who wants to entertain it. Louis Kahn was born on an island, and there sometimes seems to be this sort of bookending of islands in his career and his life. He was born on an island in Estonia, and his last built project is on an island here in New York. And I'm just wondering, Sue Ann, do you sort of make that linkage yourself? Do you see this connection between his roots and his final built project?
Well, the people in Estonia certainly makes this connection, and they had a they had a exhibition called Island to Island, and with a Estonian photographer who took wonderful pictures of Kahn's work all around the world, actually, including Roosevelt Island. So it's certainly a thought. He knew right away what he wanted to do with this site, and at that time, nobody was really thinking. I mean, some other architect might have put the Rue Memorial in the center of the island. I mean, he really knew what he was doing when it came to islands. So it could be that he was feeling his birthplace.
We didn't really ask you, Sue Ann, any personal questions tonight, but I'm wondering if there is a favorite memory of your father that you wanted to share with the room.
That would be hard because he was, everybody loved him that knew him, really. And I always loved going to the office and late at night. When I was in college, I used to hang around Rittenhouse Square Park, and anybody who knows Philadelphia knows that park. And then around 10 o'clock, a gang of us would go up to his office because we could see the light on and we could see that he was still working. And he would just take us through all the projects. And he would do that just about for anybody who turned up, but because he loved showing his work. But I loved he was very he was a very interesting father. He was very interested in. I'm a musician, and I know nothing about the publishing business, clearly, but he was very insistent on my, practicing my music, and he was very involved in that. And he was just a lot of fun to be around. I just adored him. So nothing special. No special.
Hello. So obviously we all know his reverence for FDR as culminating in the park. And it is a masterwork. It is absolutely beautiful. However, what was not said tonight and what was said in the brief overview is that Louis Kahn was actually a social architect. He was designing wartime housing for the government in the 1940s as a result of FDR's call for America to become the arsenal of democracy. So I was wondering, if there was any recurring mention of FDR in the House between, or as a result of his early work in the 1940s for the FDR, for the Roosevelt administration, and then culminating in his kind of creation of the project at the end of his life. So I was wondering if there's any record of that in the meantime.
Well, you were at the dinner table.
Yeah, I mean, Roosevelt was revered in our house. And there was no question that the government projects played a tremendous role in my father's early work. And he was always interested in housing and how people should be able to live. And they're tremendous, you know, these buildings didn't just spring suddenly up. And there was a long process of learning how people inhabit architecture and what it means. And all his architecture also has a very personal touch. If you go into the Kimmel Museum, you feel that you're in the right proportional space for a human being. But there is no question that this memorial was I guess, the commission of a lifetime. I think you could speak to that.
Well, I think the question was, is there a connection between the Roosevelt, the end of his career, and his wartime housing? But in between comes the abortive 1960 competition for a Roosevelt memorial that never was realized, that he wanted very, very much. I think Roosevelt, would he be his ideal politician? Yeah.
So maybe. Are there any other questions? Okay.
I love the way Lars described the sketchbook as this intimate, sort of fragile discovery just for the architect. And I was wondering if you came across or could tell if there was erasure and reworking of the sketches or crossing out, or was it all the sketch just came out? Could you even tell?
He was asking if there were any erase marks or smudges or reworkings of the drawings.
Okay, there was one stroke in my afterword, which I made. Actually, it was a half sentence saying that some pages are teared out, are missing, and I was guessing that maybe he wasn't just satisfied, and Sue Ann doubted that, right? And so I deleted that guess, right? So he rather took them out to give them away or to hand them over and continue work with them, right? So that was kind of my guess.
Well, in a lot of the charcoal drawings on yellow trace, you will see smudges, and he might do that. Not so much in this book, however, not at all, except for the speech that he started to rework, the speech at the Academy. He actually started to rework that in the book itself. And he made 9 different versions of that speech until he was satisfied, just like he would work on a detail in architecture until he was satisfied. And he laid the speech out very architecturally for the last version. But no, it's very shorthand. The charcoal drawings, he made one after the other, maybe in the space of 45 minutes, an hour, one after the other, completely shorthanded, not a smudge on it.
You know, I've known you for a long time, and it strikes me that your father was a perfectionist, but as a musician, you're a perfectionist too. There's something in your family, because
Shocker.
To sustain your concentration and focus like that, did he show you how to do that? Did he sit patiently with you? Your dad loved music too.
I remember once he taught me how to draw. I was not in the art world, but I had to do a book report, and I had to make a book cover. I had to make a drawing as a cover, and so he showed me how to. It was a troll in water and a fairy princess or something, and he gave me a drawing lesson, and that was a great cover. But he didn't really. I think he did this with my sister a lot, who was an artist. wonderful, wonderful painter. But he would basically spend a lot of time telling me fairy tales and drawing a map of fairyland. We were very good at that. But he was a critical ear when he would come to a concert. He would say, I think that you dropped the ends of your phrases a bit. And so he was listening, and he was aware. But because I wasn't a visual artist, we didn't do that a lot.
But can we make a distinction there? Because you, as a musician, you are an interpreter. You interpret. You
Interpret, yes. Recreate.
Yeah, recreate, right? So while Louis Kahn was a composer, so to say, and what I like is when you see these transcribed notes, is that he was building in words as well, right? So he was shaping the language as he did form and space, no? And I think that is maybe an attitude of the composer. While then we come up and we try to interpret the composed, right? And that's where the variation comes in, you know, because that is the ego of the interpreter towards the composer. And I think if we take this as we call it a partitur. What is that in English? Notation. A notation, right? So, which is right? Again, and then you kind of multiply, and that's like publishing, okay? So we have this kind of precious original, which then makes it to the world through a concert, through you, or through a book. And I think that is the role we can take, and we will never fully understand. We can speculate a little bit, but and we can read the word buildings. I like that with Corbusier as well. He was also constructing thoughts in a way, kind of building sentences in words. Right? Writing architects is a fascinating thing to observe.
Can I ask you a question, Lars? I just met Lars half an hour ago,
Yeah.
so your books are gorgeous. Am I right that this type of physical product cannot be printed in the United States now? You're in Europe, and I see a craftsmanship there which reminds me of Louis Kahn's craftsmanship.
It's unfair to say. It's unfair to say. I think probably the balance between cost and skills and costs are difficult to be found in the States, right? This is like the graphic industry in Europe still kind of sticks to some traditional processes. People who love paper, people who love the smell, you know, which is kind of not only romantic, but it's kind of compensating for maybe smaller income, to say, and that is a super anti-American attitude.
Well, I'm glad you're still in it, Lars, and I'm glad you two found each other, and I'm very grateful for having all of you here tonight. So thank you very much, and come get your copy.